welcome to the Stagecoach podcast. We're really excited to be talking today with Scott Harris, one of our authors at Dusty Saddles Publishing. And we are going to hear about his book, Abilene Ambush, that you'll see on the podcast, and then just get to know Scott a little bit. So Scott, hi.
Hi, welcome. Thanks so much for having me, Ginger.
So glad to have you here.
I'm looking forward to this.
Good. Well, tell me a little bit about yourself.
I'm 66 years old, retired a little over 3 years ago, moved to South Carolina from California, married 44 years. We've got two children, 38 and 33, a son and a daughter, and our 33-year-old daughter has a grandson, James, that just turned 2. Writing is a hobby that I started about 7 years ago. I love hobbies. I'm a big fan of hobbies. And I've had a number of them over my lifetime, and I tend to dive into them. And this one has been a blessing. It's been extraordinary. So I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I've enjoyed the process of writing. I've enjoyed the fact that people are enjoying the books. And I love the people that I get to meet through this process.
That's great. So 7 years, about 7 years of writing. So how many books have you published?
50.
Wow.
50. Yes, I love to write. And when we were in California, I owned my own company, so I had some control over my schedule, and I was able to write every day. And now that we've retired, I can write whenever I want. And so that's fantastic. And of those 50, 2/3 of them are maybe even 3/4 are Westerns. That has been the mainstay. That has been the thing that I have enjoyed and keep coming back to. I go off and try something different. I'll write a children's book or a contemporary novel or a business book or two, or a book of quotations that I've come up with myself and do that. But I always come back to the Westerns.
And what's your day of writing look like? Do you write every day? Do you need inspiration? How does that look for you?
Before I retired, I did have a pattern. I would write every weekday. I would normally start my day about 4 a.m. and get up and do my writing. And then I would give whatever I wrote to my wife and let her read it. And she would tell me whether it was any good or not, or whether it was I needed changes. And so that made life easy. Since I moved out here, I'm not nearly as formatted or regimented as I was. So it just kind of depends. When we're done here today, I'll be writing a new chapter in the new Huck book that I'm writing. And so sometimes now I write during the day or in the evening. If I wake up in the middle of the night, sometimes I'll run in here and lay down a chapter. And so it's just kind of when it hits me. And some days are I don't write at all, especially if I'm traveling. And then some days maybe I write 2 or 3 chapters, just depending on my mood.
That's great to be able to just write when the inspiration hits you. And that's a good way to spend your day.
It is a blessing to have. I do not take it for granted.
Talk to us about your character development. How do you come up with your characters?
Well, I think that the protagonists that I have, and I've done 5 different Western series. And the one that I'm working on now, the one that we're talking about, Abilene Ambush, is the first book in a new series. The first 2 have been published, and I'm working on the 3rd one now. And the protagonist there is a young man named Huck Clemens. And Huck is the adopted son of my original protagonist, who was named Brock Clemens. And the Brock Clemens series has 13 books in it. And I felt I had told the story that I wanted to tell about Brock. I was starting to reach a little bit, and I didn't want to do that. So I decided I would start writing about his son. And I think if I was candid, my protagonists are probably the equivalent of what I wish I was. They're a little stronger, a little more courageous, a little bolder, an unchallenged sense of right and wrong. And I really enjoy that. Most of the other characters in my books come from friends of mine. Almost all of my characters are named after friends or family, and I take those traits and sometimes I diminish them or exaggerate them or polish them or whatever it might be. But if you knew the person I was writing about and then you read it in the book, you would see that person in there. Those that have a sense of humor, that comes out in the book. Those that don't, they don't get one. And so it's kind of fun for me, although it makes it hard when I have to kill a character off, because then I have to call a friend of mine and say, sorry, that's it, you're out, I killed you. And that's never, even though it's fiction, it's still not an easy thing to do. But I enjoy bringing my friends into the books. And so when I was in California, I sat on the board of directors for our sheriff's department for about 15 years. So I have a number of the guys that I knew on the department that are in the book. And for me, that's an awful lot of fun. I really enjoy that.
That's great. So how do you keep them from getting mad at you and deciding to end your friendship when you have to kill them off in a book?
It hasn't happened yet. I'm sure that a couple of my friends have been disappointed when I've had to kill them. One of my recent books, it had reached a point in the book where I knew I had to kill off one or two. It's an unfortunate thing, but you can't just have all of your characters go on unscathed, because then the readers start to sense it. There's no sense of realism. And so I narrowed it down to two characters. And I said to my wife, look, I've got to kill one of these two. And she said, well, you can't kill Kevin because it'll kill him in real life. I mean, he loves being a character in the book, and he's grown over the books and become a major character. And she said, you just can't do it. And so I didn't. I unfortunately had to kill off the other guy. And so it's an interesting thing, to bring your friends into the book, and you make sure you don't embarrass them. I don't have them do anything where somebody who knows them might think I'm sharing state secrets, that he really was a philanderer or a cheat or, whatever it is. So when I bring friends of mine in the book, I don't have them do those things. If I need somebody who's going to do that, I just make somebody up. And even then, I have fun doing that. Like in the new book that I'm writing, I have a gang of outlaws, and there's 6 of them. And so to come up with the names, I went through a list of obscure Confederate generals from the Civil War, and I named each of them after an obscure general. I don't know that any of the readers will notice it, but I had fun doing that. And so I'll play around with things like that. But they're going to do some bad things. I didn't want any of my friends to be associated with that. So there you go.
Oh, that's great. I love your sense of humor, and I like how you put humor in your books. And that's not always an easy thing to do.
It is not. It is not. People, especially when you're writing a Western. So people have an idea about what a Western should be. I think most people, research has shown that most of the people who are reading the books, any of the Westerns, are a little bit older, generally white, usually male. That's changing, but nonetheless, that's where I come out of a marketing background. So if we were marketing a book, that's who we'd be going after. And those people I grew up watching black and white Westerns on television and reading Louis L'Amour novels. And so that image is in the head of a lot of people. I don't have cursing in my books, and I don't have nudity in my books. I want it to be a book that I could read to my mother or my wife or my daughter. And so that's just, I'm not against that. I don't think it should be outlawed. It's just not what I want to write. And so what I do try to do is inject a little bit of a sense of humor into some of the characters when it's appropriate. I don't make it silly humor. It's not in the middle of a gunfight. They don't stop and tell a knock-knock joke. But if I can break up the tension a little bit that's building, because that's really what you're doing in a Western, right? Is you're building tension toward the end. Most people believe that the protagonists are going to come out on top, which is probably true if you're writing a series, but you want to put them in a situation where they don't know how they're going to come out on top. where they're reading the book and going, I don't know how he's going to get out of the canyon. There's 7 guys with rifles and he's down to a knife in a canteen. I don't see it. And then you have to come up with it. And so that makes it fun. All of it, of course, is that willing suspension of disbelief. People have to be able to set aside the fact that this isn't real. These aren't real characters. It's my perception based almost exclusively on books and movies that I've seen, and then how I imagine that it might go. I like to think that the dialogue is the strongest part of my books. A couple of years ago, I got invited to do a book with a gentleman who was selling very well. I think we were 1 and 2 in Western sales in the country. And his publisher thought it would be a good idea if we co-wrote a book. We brought our 2 protagonists together and did that. And Nick Wales gave me the information and said, this is what you've been invited to do. And he said, do you know the other author? And I said, I know him by name. I don't know his work. He said, well, maybe you should read his books before you commit to doing this. So I picked up Nick sent me one of his bestsellers and I read it. And the guy killed upwards of 300 people in the book. It's not what I enjoy. Nothing wrong with it. If that's what you want to watch, that's great. You want to have a 6-gun that shoots 48 bullets, have a good time. But for me, it's the dialogue, it's the growth of the character, it's the tension of the personalities. There's always gunfights, there's always battles and fights in my books, but it's not every page. It builds to it, and then when it happens, hopefully, it's a release from the tension that's been building. And to go back to your original question, and you should be careful about asking me questions because I'll go on forever. But that release can also come through humor. It doesn't always have to come through a fist fight or a gunfight. And so I try to relieve a little bit of that tension as we go through the book together. And we really do go through the book together. When I spoke a lot at Western conferences and whatnot, and I discovered that almost everybody who writes with an outline. They outline their book, they outline the characters and the plot, and here's how we're going to go. I don't do that. I haven't found anybody else yet that doesn't do it, but I don't. I write a chapter, and at the end of the chapter, I have no better idea about what's going to happen to that character or what's going to result from the previous chapter than you do as a reader until I start writing. The chapter I'm going to start writing this afternoon, I have no idea where I'm going to take it. I'm going to reread the previous chapter and then use that motivation and move forward. But for me, that gives me a freshness to the book. If I already know that in chapter 20, I'm going to kill Ginger off, well, that's going to be shaded through my writing in chapters 1 through 19. But if I don't know what's going to happen to Ginger, then, and I'm learning at the same time the reader is, I think there's more spontaneity to the writing. I think it becomes more genuine. I'm not saying everybody should do it or it's wrong if you don't. That's how it works for me.
Okay, I love it. Tell us about Abilene Ambush.
Well, again, this was a story in the very first book. The protagonist was Brock Clemens, and Brock Clemens came into a small town called Dry Springs, Colorado. And while he was there, some bad things happened, and shockingly, he was able to fix the bad things and take care of the bad people, and he got the pretty girl. But part of what he did is he met this young boy who was about 13 years old at the time, and the boy his father had just been killed, and he was going to be shipped back east to family members that he'd never met. And Brock and Sophie, his wife, decided to adopt him instead. So they adopted the boy instead of allowing him to be shipped away. And so he's grown up in the 6 or 7 years that have passed since I started the series. So it went from about 1867 to about 1873. So now he's an 18, 19-year-old young man. He just got married. His wife is pregnant. And I thought that was going to be a more interesting tale than to keep telling stories about how Brock would come in and save the day. One of the things I'm proud of, one of the things I really enjoy is the wife, Sophie, has grown into being a very powerful woman. they went into partners with a rich gentleman in San Francisco and bought a major ranch in Montana, and that's where these books are taking place. But she actually runs the ranch. He is the foreman, but she runs the ranch and makes the decisions, and she's not a figurehead. She's a very smart, very strong, very powerful woman. And I've enjoyed trying to write that. It's not so hard for me to write men, and even men that are stronger or faster or more virtuous than I am, because that's what you try to be. But for me to then write about a woman is really challenging, because I don't want women to read the book and go, well, some idiot male wrote that. I mean, that's none of. So I have 2 or 3 women that read the chapters where she plays a key role to make sure the voice is authentic, that this is the way that a woman, or at least some women, would think. You can't write what all women would think. You can't write what all men would think, although we think less, but nonetheless, there you go. So I started this series. Abilene Ambush is the first book in the series. There's a second book called Deadly Sue, and now I'm writing the third book. But in the first book, the young man, Huck, who is 17 at the time, had fallen in love with a young woman in Abilene and wanted to marry her against her father's wishes and his parents' wishes. But obviously they wound up getting married. So he goes down to Abilene to gather up some cattle and to bring her back into Montana. It's about a 1,000-mile ride to get from point A to B. And that whole book is about what happens on the drive itself. And so obviously they run into some challenges with some of the natives, with weather, with outlaws. Things happen. You've got to put those things in there. But in the meantime, they're growing. They're growing as people. And I love that. I love that. So now in the third book, they're much different people than they were in the first and second book. They've matured, and they've gone through some things. I'll go through some things in this book, and then we'll see where it goes.
Okay, well, one of the quotes that you said when we talked the other day is, you honor the readers by honoring your characters. And I think in just listening to you in this interview, you get a really good sense that your characters just come to life. And
well, thank you. Well, thank you. That's as high a compliment as I can be paid. I really, if you ask me if I could write a great conversation or a great action scene, I would pick the great conversation. I love them. I absolutely love them. I love to write the conversations between Brock and Sophie, and now the younger, the adopted son and his wife, Huck and Sarah. But I love writing the dialogue between, say, Brock and one of the antagonists. I make the antagonists fairly smart. They're not, I mean, some of them I just make goobers, but mostly I like to make them very smart and challenging mentally as well as physically. I try not to make the characters all have black hats or white hats, because very few of us are that in real life. Most of us have flaws. Most of us are trying to be good, but some of us are evil and some of us don't try to be good. But that doesn't mean that we can't on occasion do something good. And so that's where the conflict, where the rub is, I think. And for me, that's why I'm frequently asked why I write Westerns. And the reason that I chose Westerns to write when I started to write fiction is because I love the fact that I don't have to worry about technology and CGI and all of these different things. It's really a man, a horse, and a gun. And if you strip it down to that, then you really do have to make it about the characters in the story. You can't hide behind how fast the tank goes or how fast the plane flies or some sort of superhero belt or anything like that. You're boiled down to the essence. And more than any other genre, I think Westerns do that. It is just the simplest thing. And then in order to make it interesting, you have to make the people and the events interesting. You have nothing to hide behind. you go to watch some of these movies, and when you come out, you can't remember a single word of dialogue. All you remember were these massive blowing up of buildings and cars and all that. And so many books are the same way. Half the book is a description about the submarine or the warplane or the, whatever it might be. And then the other half are those things blowing somebody up. And the characters don't really matter. And I think characters do matter. I think they matter the most. So if I can bring them a sense of humor, a sense of vulnerability, if I can have them make mistakes and have to have them recover and learn from those mistakes, then I feel like I have to, thanks for reminding me of what I said the other day, but then I feel that I've honored the characters. And so that for me, it's very simple, really. I write what I would like to read.
Yeah.
And if other people want to read it, I think that's fantastic. I'm flattered when they do. But if they don't, I still have a blast writing it. I've got a core group of friends and family that enjoy reading them. It works for me.
Well, I know that your readership is huge, and people do love your books. I'm so grateful that we get to put one of your books on our podcast, so it will be introduced to a whole different segment of our population. So
Well, I'm thrilled about that. And if anybody watching and listening to this, by the way, has thoughts or suggestions about the characters or feedback, good or bad, I love to hear it. I love to hear it. I mean, hearing from family and friends is one thing, but hearing from readers who I don't know from around the country, around the world, that send a note and say, hey, this didn't ring true, and I don't think she would have done that, that way, or, it's like, okay, let me rethink it. I don't pretend to be perfect on all these things. I make mistakes with my characters. Either I hold them back too much or push them forward, or a little bit too far to the left or the right. And hearing what people have to say is really fun. And I love that people are paying that much attention. I think that's just, it's flattering to think that people are really thinking about the characters that you write about.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Well,
they become real. The characters become real to you. I mean, my dog is named after Brock Clemens. My dog is named Brock, and named after the character. And so I say my protagonist's name 20 times a day.
well, let's talk a little bit about another big interest of yours, raptors. I want to know
Okay.
how that fits into your life.
Well, that is the newest hobby. I mentioned before that I have a passion for hobbies, and almost always when I start a new hobby, I end an old one. I like to stay focused that way. But when I started this new hobby, I did not end the writing hobby. I enjoyed it too much. I've kept it going. The birding started about 3 years ago when we moved to South Carolina. I became fascinated with the birds out here. I don't know why I wasn't when I lived in California. There's a much greater variety of birds in California than there is in South Carolina. But I fell in love with the birds out here. And then as I got to know a little bit more about them, I fell in love with the raptors. And the raptors are the owls, the hawks, the eagles, the osprey. And there are 53 of them in the country, and 53 different species. So I just tried to learn about them, and I started to try to see them. And then I decided that it would be fun to try to see all 53 of them in 1 year. So I started traveling around the country. My wife was very kind in allowing me to do that. I did 2 trips a month. It did not take me 12 months. It took me 17 months to find all 53. There were about a half dozen that were far more challenging than the others. And but after 17 months, I was able to track down all 53, and I wrote a book about it, about each of the birds and about all my adventures and all my travels and my mistakes and the successes and the failures. And I loved it. And now I've started traveling around the country, giving talks about that. I'm doing it by Zoom. I'm doing it on podcast. And I am traveling around and speaking in person to various Audubon groups and bird clubs and nature societies and stuff where they think that their members might have an interest. And so I'm thrilled about it. I'm thoroughly enjoying it. I'm in the middle of writing 2 more birding books. I enjoyed writing the first one so much. And so I try to balance each day, you know, am I going to work on the Western today? Am I going to work on a bird book? Or maybe I'll do both depending on the day.
Oh, that's great. I apologize for my cat jumping on the computer right then, but
What's the cat's name?
this is Bengal.
Hello,
And
Bengal.
yeah, he is uh, a nuisance, a cat for sure. Maybe they all are.
Cats and teenage boys.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about, your new books that are coming out. You've already mentioned that you're working on the 3rd in the series now,
Yes.
and then the Raptor book as well. So let's talk a little bit about how our listeners can find you. I know that your books are on Amazon,
The
and
books are on Amazon. If you go to my author page, it's just Scott Harris author, and Amazon has those. And it lists a lot more than 50 books because I've done anthologies and stuff through Nick, and there's a number of other books in there. But you can find all of my books on that page. If you're only interested, if you were interested in the Raptor book, you could go to worldofraptors.com. But you can also find that on my author page at Amazon. And so they're easy to track down. They show the books in order. And the very first one is a book called Coyote Courage. And I would imagine that if you forced me to answer the question, which is my favorite, that might be it. I mean, it's like your first love. You just don't forget it. I don't know that it was my best written book or the characters were developed as fully as they could have been, but it's my favorite. And it just kicks off. That particular series is 13 books long. And these ones, Abilene Ambush, which is the first in this 3-book series, they're a continuation of it. You'll see the same characters that are in there. I've just moved the story forward a little bit, but the characters are there. We've just shifted where now everything is seen through Huck's eyes instead of Brock's eyes, and it's fresh and it's exciting. And he's his first girlfriend became his wife, and all of these things are new and exciting and fun. And I think they're enjoyable for the reader. They're certainly enjoyable for me as the writer.
Well, we look forward to, reading your books and listening to Abilene Ambush on our podcast here. And, Scott, thank you so much. This has been so nice getting to know you. And I can't wait to read your books.
You are a sweetheart, Ginger. This has been an absolute pleasure for me. Thank you very much. And I'll look forward to watching this again from the different point of view of being a listener and not the talker. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you. You too.
All righty. Bye-bye.